When tragedy, God forbid, strikes, or there's some sort of traumatic event that throws off the equilibrium of your life, whether it's a global tragedy, a communal tragedy, or some sort of interpersonal familial thing, something going on in your own family that's going to, like, God forbid, throw off your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with your kids. So how do we deal with this? What do we do? I mean, the natural thing to want to do is let's talk about it. And sometimes let's even lament it. Let's sit together, let's mourn. But that's not going to create hope, because when you talk about problems, the problem is going to get scarier and scarier and scarier, because you're going to understand the full scope of the problem, or at least you're going to think you understand the full scope of the problem. Maybe you'll inflate the problem to even bigger than it is and lose faith. Maybe you'll understand the true scope of the problem and still lose faith because of how real it is. But there is another option, which is to talk about hope, talk about your preferred reality. Because when you talk about problems, the problem becomes more real. When you talk about hope, the hope becomes more real. And you can develop the strength that despite what's going on in your marriage, or what's going on in your family, or what's going on within your community, or within our people as a whole, we can still have hope, we can still grow, and we can still thrive if we start speaking with that language. And we see this in the story of Purim. The Midrash tells us that when tragedy had struck, the very first thing that Mordechai did was gather all the children. Haman wants to kill all the Jewish people, and Mordechai, who happened to have been a minister in King Ahasuerus' cabinet, didn't employ, at least not yet, his political connections. The first thing he did was gather the Jewish children to daven, to learn. But what I found interesting is not just the fact that he had gathered the Jewish children as a source of strength for the Jewish people, but what they had learned at that point when they had gathered, to me, was just fascinating. Because the Midrash says, what did they learn about? They learned about the halachos of the Beis HaMikdash, the laws of the temple in Jerusalem, about its construction, and they were just learning those laws, learning those halachos. That's fascinating, because at this point in Purim, the story of Purim, historically, this was like exile. This was in the middle of or toward the end of the Babylonian exile. It was about 60 years after the destruction of the first temple. So the Jews are in a bad situation, and it's going from bad to worse. And rather than gathering together to lament, which is going to create despair, this is going to create negative energy, they gather together and they essentially have a conversation about the preferred reality that they'd rather have, which is the Beis HaMikdash. That's really what we want. We want redemption. We want a home for God. And they have a conversation about that in depth. They learn about that. That creates hope. That creates a strength. And it put the Jews in the right mindset to wanting more of that, ultimately doing teshuvah and reversing the evil decree of Haman and saving their lives. And when, God forbid, problems happen, whether it's in your marriage or it's a personal issue, thinking about things that give you hope will strengthen your hope. Having conversations about the preferred reality will strengthen who you are to be able to pull yourself out of there. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.